Good morning, ladies. Happy Tuesday. I hope this message finds you well. Let's go. Get up, get up, get up. You can do it. I know. Majority of the entire country is cold and under nice, warm, toasty blankets, but you can get up and you can conquer this day. We can do all things. Working from the house today. I have a lot to get done. An appointment as well as little mama's dance recital, so I have to go on my lunch break to get a most likely like a little dress or something for her. I still haven't done that. However, when there's a will, there's a way. But before we get our day started, we are on a new book in the Bible, Esther. We are on Esther. And just a little background setting and some information prior to us starting. The story of Esther occurs during the Achaemenid period of biblical history, which is in 559 to 330 BC, in the court of the Persian King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, who ruled Persia from 486 to 465 BC. This places the events of the story at least 50 years after the decree of Cyrus in 538 BC, which announced that the exiled Jews could return to Jerusalem, and about 25 years before Ezra's return to Jerusalem. Esther and Mordecai were living in the royal city of Susa, Hebrew pronounced Shushan. Susa had been an important political, cultural, and religious center for centuries. At the time of Esther, the city was one of the capital cities of a vast empire stretching from what is now India in the east to Turkey and Ethiopia in the west. The ruins of Susa are in Iran near its border with Iraq. Now, the purpose of Esther, as traditionally understood, is to explain the origin of the Jewish holiday of Purim as a celebration of deliverance. From the Second Temple period until now, the Megillat Esther, which is known as the Scroll of Esther, in its entirety is read in the assemblies of the Jews as a central rite of the observance of Purim. Although women are normally exempt from mandatory attendance at worship, they are required to be present for the reading of Esther. The story has provided encouragement and hope for the Jews who from that day until this, like Esther and Mordecai, have lived far from Jerusalem. The story of Esther is similar to that of Joseph in the court of the Egyptian Pharaoh and of Daniel in the court of Babylon. Each of these stories is about a Jew who was delivered from a death plot and rose to a high position in a pagan government. A most conspicuous feature of the book of Esther is the complete absence of any mention of God, the temple, Jerusalem, or the law. In this sense, it appears to be a completely secular book which relates to its story on the purely human plane of history. Nevertheless, this book is about God's chosen people, and it appears in both the Jewish and Christian canon of Scripture. Therefore, the book must be understood in the canonical context of redemptive history. The major theme of the book is God's sovereign power to work, even through pagans, in order to preserve and deliver his people. The enemies of God's people, portrayed possibly as Amalekites in the book of Esther, cannot prevail over his purposes, even when God himself seems strangely absent, referenced and seen in Esther chapter 3, verse 1. The name of the holiday Purim, or also known as the Feast of Lots, which celebrates this great deliverance, commemorates the theme that the destiny of God's people will not be determined by anything other than the purpose of God himself. And that is absolutely true, as God is the all being, end all, and be all. We are going to be hopping on Esther chapter 1 and 2 today, and verse 1 goes like this. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 128 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants. The powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Verse 5, and when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the woman in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abigatha, Zather, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Verse 13, Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mares, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence, and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti, according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, brought to her by the eunuchs? Verse 16, And Memucan answered the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report. King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day the nobles, ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all this empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. Verse 21, And they reply pleased the king, and the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people. We are on chapter 2. Verse 1. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan, the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them, when let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. In Shushan the citadel there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. Verse 7, And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree was heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, Esther was also taken to the king's palace into the care of Haggai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman's turn came to go in the king of Ahasuerus. After she had completed 12 months' preparation according to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparations apportioned, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. Verse 14, in the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who also kept the concubines, who she would not go into the king. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted her and called her for her by name. Now, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. Verse 19, when virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat with the eunuch within the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Verse 22, so the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther. And Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when inquiry was made to the matter, and it was confirmed, and both were charged on gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. And that is all we'll stop for today. And begin Esther chapter 3 and all that good stuff tomorrow. I hope you're going to see what's going on, Esther. We actually have, if you hop onto Instagram and Facebook, I actually have 10 days of women, changed women. They might have big, huge parts of the Bible, but important nonetheless. And Queen Vashti was actually on today's devotion, and her importance of what she started and of what Esther finished. So we're going to learn quite a bit in this short book, but good stuff nonetheless, and it probably all speaks to us differently, especially as a female. You'll see that Esther feels and goes through certain things that not necessarily in context of what we might do for today, but the feelings nonetheless. So looking forward to going over this, because we did a devotional about 1.5 years ago, but it was just a short book devotion. We didn't read through the entire book of Esther, so good times ahead. Yeah, let's be an Esther, let's be a Mary, let's be all we can be today and make a difference. Do a good deed today. To whoever that needs to hear that, do a good deed today. Be positive. Do not think of the negative nor dwell on it, because that is when Satan stirs up his mischief. So, don't know where that came from, but whoever needed to hear it, I hope that message helps you. But let's get this day started. I hope you have a blessed day. Talk to you tomorrow.